House Arryn, House Bar Aemon, House Beesbury, House Bigglestone, Blackwood, Borrell, Bracken, Brune of Brownhollow, Brune of Dyerden, Buckler, Birch, Caswell, Celtigar, Serwyn, Costain, Chambers, Charlton, Corbray, Crab, Darkland, Derry, Deddings, Dustin, Fell, Flint of Flint's Fingers, Footley, Frey, Grey, Greyjoy, Grimm, Hart, Hayford, Hornwood, Mallister, Manderley, Massey, Merriweather, Mullender, Perrion, Piper, Root, Rowan, Royce, Smallwood, Stark, Staunton, Stunderland, Tarley, Tully, House Vance of Wayfarer's Rest, House Viprin, and House Wood. Now that is one side of the conflict that this spin-off show is going to be based on. That's just one side. Those are all the houses that pledge themselves to black. And what's my point in going all for 30 seconds naming all these houses? Well, I want to get this out of the way before we even get this show. Half of those houses on one side will immediately be cut. A lot of the stuff will be cut. If we know that going into this show, then we'll know that we're still going to get an amazing product, but let's not expect everything. Now in this video, I'm going to discuss a bunch of casting news as well as several leaked scenes that I've been sent information about. Now before we even get into it, take this information with a grain of salt, as it may or may not be a load of bullshit, but as always, here's your sign. Now before we get started, can you all watching this do me a massive favor and slap a like on this video? The like goal is probably going to be something around 420. Also, this is the most important part. Make sure you're subscribed and turn your notifications on, so that way you'll get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. And a quick shout out and thank you to Brick23, Bloody Tyrant, Leah Hendrickson, Angie Delehanty, Nancy Tockstein, Marilyn Miller, Fred Wicks, BEL-a-Donna, Cater Tot, and Joe Swag. Those are all members of my Patreon family, and if you all watching or interested, check the link down in the bio. Now relating on back to what I said at the beginning of this video, if we all go into this new show House of the Dragon understanding that, well, to put it quite simply and frank, a book is a fucking book and a TV show is a fucking TV show, we have to understand that the two mediums are two separate things. So if we, before we even start House of the Dragon, if we reiterate to ourselves enough that this is an amazing story, what we're gonna get is gonna blow all of television out of the water and probably surpass Game of Thrones in its creativity and amazingness, if we understand that beforehand, that we're still going to miss some things before going into it, well then maybe we're going to be less likely to get disappointed. I mean, I'm well aware of the fact that everybody is allowed to have their own opinion, and I made this channel to express my own opinion. But when you start ignoring like common sense, like, hey, well, a book is 1,000 pages, a TV show will be lucky to even be half of that, or, you know, a third of that, and 100 episodes. When you pretend that those laws don't exist and then you just make fun of a show, ignoring that entirely, that they're two separate mediums, it really just pisses me off, and I feel like I needed to say something about that. But let's jump into the leaks. Now, with the recent confirmed, unconfirmed rumors of a lot of online magazine sites sort of confirming that they've started the casting process, mind you, I knew about this several months ago, but since they've officially started, I'd like to share the news that they've actually started spotting filming locations in New Zealand. With COVID-19 pretty much locking down the world, there are several countries that got ahead of the curve and are going to start opening up. Now, New Zealand actually opened up at the beginning of June, and according to my sources, they've actually sent several, I don't know what these guys are called, I guess spotting directors or sort of filming directors. They're like directors of photography, so they go and they scout certain locations that are going to work for scenes that they're filming on the show. Now, since most of the undercast, meaning like not the lead cast members, but most of the one-off or they're going to die by the end of the first season characters have already been cast, filming locations are sort of next up. I've actually heard rumors they've started filming locations where major houses or where a lot of scenes are going to take place for concept artists, meaning that once they've finished filling out the cast and actually started filming, we'll likely get some concept art either leaked onto Reddit or maybe even released from the Game of Thrones Twitter account. I feel like I've said this in every single House of the Video Dragon I make nowadays, but they've been working on this show since 2016. It's 4 years down the line, and the last news we heard of it really was in October of last year. Everybody knows that how this year's been going. We all need some good news about future shows and entertainments that will allow us to escape this reality. Now, another thing that's a bit more far-fetched, but it's more on the rumor side, is that they've actually started making the costumes. Now, there's a really famous scene from the Dance with Dragons, and I'm going to start referring to them as scenes because now that we know that this show is going to be focused on the Dance of the Dragons, then we know that we can start looking and picking apart major moments from Fire and Blood and from the Princess and the Queen and start theorizing and speculating on how they're going to turn out on screen. But the penultimate moment that I'm talking about from the Dance of the Dragons is the moment that the Greens and the Blacks is actually made. Now, there is a tourney celebrating the 5-year anniversary of King Viserys I, who is actually the son of King Jaehaerys. He was the next king in line after the greatest Targaryen king who ever ruled. The tourney is in King's Landing, and it's to celebrate Queen Alicent, who is pretty much the de facto leader of the Greens, and her marriage to King Viserys I. It's their 5th-year anniversary, and Queen Alicent, who was going to be one of the main characters in this show, was wearing a green gown for her House Hightower, and then you have Princess Rhaenyra, who was technically going to be taking King Viserys' place, but obviously, you know, the usurpation happened, but she wore a traditional black and red gown. And from that moment on, the sides, when you're referring to whether it was the queen or the princess, they were more so referred to the Greens or the Blacks. Now for the juiciest part. So apparently, what I've been told is, and remember, take this with a grain of salt, but the timeline is a lot further along than we're being told. Like, the leaks right now is that they're casting Princess Rhaenyra and Queen Alicent. Well, actually, they've already cast Rhaenyra, and she's apparently an Australian actress who is somewhat well known. They already cast Rhaenyra, and supposedly she looks a lot like Daenerys, and the reason why it sounds like I'm fumbling from words is because I'm reading this from the leaks. But apparently the opening scene is actually going to take place where the Greens versus the Blacks is established, which is what I was just talking about, that 5th-year anniversary of the marriage of King Viserys I and Queen Alicent. Now, this person goes on to state that apparently they filmed a few scenes with Rhaenyra and some background extras. And speaking of background extras, this person states that 500 background extras will be needed for the background of this tourney, which is going to take place in King's Landing. So if this person is to be believed and they are filming some scenes in New Zealand, I'm kind of curious to how they're going to make that look like King's Landing. We know from last year that the Game of Thrones studio, or the Titanic Studios in Belfast, Game of Thrones had a lease with them for the longest time, and they broke that lease. That was where a lot of the show's scenes were filmed. We had, you know, King's Landing being filmed there. King's Landing was also filmed in like Croatia and Spain, but we also had some indoor scenes filmed at that location. We had a lot of House Stark filmed up there, so a lot of those scenes in the north, that all fits in perfectly with Ireland. But we're going to be spending a lot more time down south with the Targaryens, so we need a big open sprawling location in New Zealand. We all know Lord of the Rings was filmed there, so it's got that massive potential to film like sweeping landscape shots for backdrops. Now, if I'm interjecting my opinion here a little bit, I think we're still on hold as far as what countries are going to be open back up in full force for filming locations, so I think they're sort of playing it a little bit by the ear for what's going on in New Zealand, if they actually have been down there. Like, our people that filmed most of the stuff when it would leak from when they were filming in Belfast or somewhere in Northern Ireland, they're pretty good with drones and flying in and looking for stuff. And we don't exactly know who is every single person involved with this show, so if HBO was smart, they would send a whole new group of people that we had never seen working on the set of Game of Thrones to go and either spot these filming locations or actually film these locations for the concept art. That could have already happened. Usually what I'm getting at is we are on top of stuff like that, but since this is a whole new show, we don't really know how much to take away from these rumors. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, King Viserys is only the 5th Targaryen king to sit the Iron Throne in Westeros. So literally 103 years before he ever took the throne, King Aegon, the first Targaryen who came over and united the 6 kingdoms and then later the 7th one, this was only 100 years after that. So as far as filming backdrops and stuff in New Zealand, well, we kind of need a new fresh take because this is like 150 years before the birth of Jon Snow. So, you know, almost 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones TV series takes place. And one thing I kind of glazed over was the fact that they said that Rhaenyra had been cast and that she looks a lot like Daenerys. Well, I hope so. So the name of the actress wasn't exactly given because apparently this person thinks that would give away who they were, as if they hadn't already given away enough information. But just looking over some Australian actresses, Margot Robbie would obviously be my #1 choice. Massive crush on her. But some more likely choices, Poppy Montgomery, maybe even Alicia Debnam Carey. She's working, last I know, she was working on the Walking Dead, one of the Walking Dead spinoffs. I don't know if her character's been killed off or if she's still on that show, but another one is Angourie Rice, a little bit less common, but she does have that look of like, you know, she could totally be a Targaryen. Claire Hoyt, Emma Booth, and maybe Jacinda Barrett. This person mentions that they're still looking for audition tapes for the person or the actress to play Alicent. They also mentioned that they're casting someone for flashbacks. They wouldn't say who, but the code name for that role is Aged King. Now, the only flashback I could maybe think of is a flashback to King Viserys, who's going to likely play a major role in like the first season and then die, or maybe it will take place after. Who knows? But I thought of him, but then I also thought of King Jaehaerys the First, or the greatest Targaryen king, the greatest king to ever sit the Iron Throne in Westeros. This man was known as the Wise King, but there was a point in which during his reign that the primogeniture was discussed, and he had a point to name his heir, and he chose to name the oldest mare, if I'm not mistaken, the oldest male heir, as opposed to Rhaenys. And a lot of people think that he didn't choose Rhaenys because that would have made him like a usurper, because he took the Iron Throne as opposed to his older brother's siblings. So that was called agnatic cognatic primogeniture. But if we have a flashback to that time, it will really explain the events of the Dance of the Dragons. There's a reason why it sort of starts, and it was like almost like I had mentioned, King Viserys is Jaehaerys' son, so it happened during his father's reign. There was never a dominant rule established, and that's sort of blowing back in all of the next generation's faces, which is really going to be the driving force behind this show. So if that flashback rumor is to be believed that they're trying to cast an aged Jaehaerys, then that could potentially play a part. And the last thing this person mentions was that a lot of the minor parts had been filmed, and I kind of mentioned that before, so I'm not going to spend too much time discussing that. Well, at this point, alright, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 420. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, please subscribe and please turn your notifications on. That is the most crucial thing you could do to help me out, and you also get notified every single time I drop a video throughout the long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name is Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts. Return of the Dragon Reviews.